JD Vance is framing himself as a pro-worker family man, but he's doing it in a way that's alienating a lot of voters, and it's also going against a lot of his past record. We were talking before we started rolling about comments he made in a lot of old podcasts, and one that you brought up that's really taken the internet by storm is the cat lady comment.
Yeah, so he made a comment when he was running for Senate in 2021 on Fox News. I think it was an interview with Hannity or with Tucker Carlson,
Yeah.
I think, where he basically said the Democratic Party is run by a bunch of childless cat ladies, people who don't have actual personal stake in the future of the country. And he first, when it brought up and it kind of went viral online and everyone was talking about it, he said they're just focusing on the sarcasm. But then he really did double down on what he meant by the problems with the Democratic Party. Like, he was like, yeah, but the Democratic Party is anti-family, and they don't generally find themselves in traditional families. And he points out how Kamala Harris doesn't have kids of her own, and how Pete Buttigieg isn't in a traditional family. And he's trying to use that to point out that they would be worse governors of the country.
Yeah.
And I think that's a terrible line of attack. I think the media and people that have heard it have responded in thinking that's a terrible line of attack. And it's, again, as far as weird goes, it seems like a weird thing to focus on.
It's also mean. I mean, it's also it's not just weird, it's also just mean. There
Yes.
are a lot of people who wanted kids and maybe couldn't have had kids.
Sure.
There's a lot of people who don't have kids but dedicate their lives to service and to their country.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that they have any desire to not help their neighbors' kids. I mean, it takes a community to raise a kid, right? It takes a village, right? That's a very classic American mindset, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's a very communal type of thinking that I think a lot of Americans share with one another.
Yeah, it's very alienating. It reminded me of Hillary's deplorable comment.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of looking down on large swaths of the country just for pretty like clear-headed decisions they made about this major part of their lives. Like the idea that adults without children are worse than adults with children. That's what I'm getting from what he's saying.
Well, he says in another clip, he's like, I want to penalize bad behavior and reward good behavior. And because of that, I want a higher tax rate on people who don't have kids.
Yes. And
what's interesting is that's kind of what we do now.
Yeah.
Because we have a thing called the child tax credit. And you're able to get some money back for each kid that you have. Mm-hmm. And you and I are huge proponents of the child tax credit. We believe wholeheartedly in the effectiveness of a child tax credit. The state of Minnesota has a statewide child tax credit, which is very, very effective. But the way that he frames it, he's like talking negative to the people who don't have kids instead of just talking positive to the people who do have kids.
Yeah.
And he's making this like hatred line where it's so weird.
He's stoking division, and I feel like this is where weird almost isn't the right word. It just seems dumb. Like it's a political mistake.
Yes.
Why would you be trying to alienate these people? The Republican base is not only made up of adults with families. Right? You're like, by saying adults who haven't had kids kind of should be penalized, that seems ridiculous.
It seems absolutely ridiculous. Another guy, the Dave Portnoy from Barstool Sports, came out against JD Vance for that because he's a famous bachelor.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't have kids. Why should I be paying more money for that? I don't agree with where he's coming from with his take, but it is what JD Vance is doing is just alienating, and it's not an inviting of a big tent coalition.
I just have to say that the fact that Portnoy came out against him is so ironic because Portnoy is like bro king.
Yes.
And JD Vance was supposed to be like the broier VP candidate to get to like maybe endear the Trump campaign to young men. Mm-hmm. If you're getting Portnoy to come out against you, like you're clearly doing something wrong.
You're doing something wrong, and this is what's driving down JD Vance's approval rating. He's the most disapproved of vice presidential nominee in recent history, I think going back to 1980 when we started keeping records of this.
Really?
He's the most unpopular
Worse
VP
than
candidate.
Palin?
Yes, worse than Palin right now in the presidential cycle.
Okay.
He's worse than Palin.
Wow.
I think he's at -14, which is the worst that a VP pick has ever been up until this point.
-14 meaning 14 worse than Trump?
No, -14 net net favorable is
Got
negative
it.
14.
Got it.
And also, so this is where he's coming out with the family thing, and then he tries to he's trying to be this pro worker, blue collar type of figure.
Yes.
And he makes statements referencing how unions are good, but he also waffles on whether he wants to get rid of right to work legislation. He doesn't want to pass the PRO Act, but he says it's because he's in favor of sectoral bargaining over the type of industry specific bargaining that the NLRB focuses on. And then he talks about how the American worker is like something very important to keep. The manufacturing worker is so vital to keep. And he was on a stump speech 2 days ago, and he said that he would give up 10 million cheap toasters to save one American manufacturing job. That's obviously hyperbolic because it's very short-sighted, right? That would increase costs to every American consumer if that were going to be the case. And Americans also don't want to be producing the world's toasters. We're above that now. We have better and higher paying jobs that require more skills. But all of that aside, his record so far in the Senate has not proven to be a very pro-worker record. And one piece of legislation that I'm talking about specifically is called the Teamwork for Employees and Managers Act. It's called the TEAMS Act. And it was originally proposed in 1995, passed by the Republican House and Senate, vetoed by President Clinton. And it's been brought back by Vance and Marco Rubio.
Okay.
And what this does specifically is it opens up the Section 8A2 of the National Labor Relations Act. Now, this is going to get a little technical, but it's important because it's kind of understanding the history of American labor conflict and American labor rights. So this Section 8A2 outlawed employer-dominated labor organizations designed to dealing with labor disputes. This was basically called back in the day company unions. And it would be like a company-run organization that would allow managers to talk with employees, and it kind of worked as a suggestion box almost.
Got it.
But back in the day, in the 20s, you could like do collective bargaining through it instead of an outside union. And unions would get killed by these company unions, and the company unions would say, oh, we've given you representation already and all this stuff.
Sure.
So the TEAMS Act wants to now open up that rule. And so what they want to do is allow these company unions to come back in full force, allow these they won't be allowed to collectively bargain, but they're going to be allowed to handle like workplace safety issues, time off disputes, these other things, kind of taking the idea from the union's perspective. The AFL and the CIO, they're highly against this. And the reason is because it feels like they're taking the knees out from under them. They're taking away their power a little bit and putting it back in the hands of the companies. Now, another thing the TEAMS Act wants to do is introduce an employee involvement organization. These are called EIOs. And it would allow, at very large companies, workers to elect a representative to observe company board meetings. Now, initially when I read that, I'm like, oh, that's actually pretty good. I actually like the idea of workers being able to elect a representative onto company boards. But then when I actually understood what they're talking about, it's not a voting member of company boards. It's just an observer. They can't change anything. In addition to this, the companies would be allowed to kick out the EIO whenever they wanted. So if a company doesn't like the representative, they can kick out the representative whenever they want. So this piece of legislation has been lambasted by unions across the United States. The SEIU, the AFL, the CIO, the Teamsters, all of them are against the TEAMS Act. But J.D. Vance was the one who just co-sponsored the TEAMS Act. And it puts more power into the corporations of determining labor rights and labor relations. And for someone who wants to be this pro-worker, blue-collar guy, I don't see how you can be in support of the TEAMS Act, which is opposed by every single union in the country, and then be claimed to be pro-union, pro-worker.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem reasonable to me. And
no.
It's one of those things that goes under the radar very frequently, especially because I feel like it's a very unique, like an obscure piece of legislation to want to bring back company unions and stuff.
Yes. It is super technical.
Right.
Like you said. And most people, like, you have to dig pretty far to actually be able to understand, like, oh, this came up in the 90s and it's gone and they're reviving it. And what is a company union again?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I wrote 2 pages all about this, and I've given you a brief summary over 3 minutes, but I could talk about this for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, and it's one of those things where you have to be really careful not to just take rhetoric at the word.
Oh, yeah.
You got to go back and read the records.
Sure.
You have to. it's important, and media should do a better job of this.
Yeah.
Because I feel like the media is failing us a little bit.
You think the media isn't calling out Vance for being anti-worker enough?
You don't have to. I mean, call him out is tough language.
Sure.
But ask him questions about it.
Okay.
I haven't heard him take one question on the Teams Act, but this could fundamentally, totally upend the National Labor Relations Act if it passed.
Gotcha.
It could totally change the relationship between union and worker
Yeah.
and employer. And it's worthwhile to understand, if this person wants to be our president, what did he mean by co-sponsoring onto this legislation?
For sure. Okay. I'm not sure. Is Vance going on hostile media
That's
shows
a good
right now?
point too. I don't see him on any hostile media interviews.
Yeah,
That's
because I
true.
do know that Trump has generally been avoiding them, which is why this whole NABJ thing was a big deal.
You're right. You're right. They really haven't gotten the opportunity to go at Vance for any of this.
Yeah, the fracturing of media kind of makes it much safer for people who want to run with their views unchallenged.
That's a very good point, because JD Vance is going on TV a lot, and he's going on a lot of podcasts, but they're all friendly podcasts and friendly TV shows, which I don't want to say that Harris is going on and doing these hard interviews, because she's not.
She's not. At least not yet, no.
And she should, but so should JD Vance, and he should take questions on this record.